Cop wrote note for pregnant waitress. Then she ran to her boss. Waiting tables is an infamously tough job to have. A combination of long hours, rude customers, and poor pay make it particularly unrewarding and frustrating. But that doesn't mean your hard work doesn't pay off once in a while. Here's a story of a New Jersey waitress called Courtney English. Some customers can tip big, and when they do, it all can somehow seem worth it. As well as tips, some people notice your hard work and want to show their appreciation in the most special ways. The hard work from the happy-go-lucky Courtney was always noticed too. She was a popular waitress at her New Jersey restaurant called Lamp Post Diner. She always served her customers with a smile on her face, and a lot of regular customers would know her name. The owner of the restaurant, Nick Honus, described her as a sweet young girl who always makes sure she goes above and beyond. But in February 2019, Courtney was 8 months pregnant and still working hard. She just wouldn't give up. At 23 years old, Courtney wanted to make sure she could provide the best life for her baby on the way. And if that meant working extra hours into her late pregnancy, then that was what she was going to do. Courtney was no longer in a relationship with the father of the baby, but he was still totally supportive throughout the pregnancy. Courtney was more than ready to go it alone and be a wonderful single mother. Plus, living with her amazing dad, Brian Cadigan, also provided her with extra support. Although Courtney was amazing at her job, she knew it wasn't what she wanted to do forever. She got her GED, and in the future she hoped to become a nurse. She's a naturally caring person, so her warmth and kindness will be a perfect fit for being a nurse. Nonetheless, being a waitress was the right thing for her to be doing at this point in her life, giving her a chance to settle into life as a working mother and save up as much money as possible. As soon as Courtney felt pregnant, she knew she needed to get some more money in the bank. She loved her little bump more than anything else in the whole world already. So if she wanted to be the best mom possible, she knew she had to make sure she could provide for her. She'd worked at the Lamp Post Diner for a while now, and she loved the supportive team she worked with too. It was the perfect place for her to be, especially when the tips were good. As Courtney got closer and closer to her due date, she had no idea that her life was about to change. And it all started on one typical and ordinary day. It was February 15th, 2019, and she was well into her shift at the diner, completing her usual tasks of waiting tables, greeting guests, and serving food. Nothing was out of the ordinary, or so she thought. At this point, Courtney was very clearly pregnant. She was carrying a rather large bump around, but nonetheless, she was still giving exceptional service, of course. The diner was always particularly busy, especially during peak hours. This meant Courtney would be serving a lot of tables at once. However, her joyful and skillful service never faltered. She was excellent at her job, and everyone could see that she was. Of course, Courtney would try and be as friendly as possible to all of her customers, but when she notices that someone doesn't really want to chat, she'd take a backseat approach. On this particular shift, there was a cop sitting in the corner who was on his own. He was quite clearly one of the customers who didn't want to chat much, so Courtney did her usual pleasantries and served him as she usually did. He was on his own, so she guessed that he wanted to enjoy his food in peace and be on his way once he had finished. There were multiple tables to serve, so Courtney was a little rushed off her feet, but all throughout her shift, she kept noticing the cop. Funnily enough, he kept noticing her too. They hadn't chatted much themselves, but as he ate his salad, he kept seeing how cheerfully chatty she was to other customers. He really admired this about her. As she served the table next to him, he overheard their conversations in which Courtney told the diners all about how excited she was to have her first baby, and how she was still working to make sure she saved as much money as she possibly could. This made the cop smile. Courtney hadn't realized that the cop was listening in on her conversation. For all she knew, he was lost in his own little world as he tried to enjoy his dinner. A few minutes passed, and the cop had finished his meal. She cleared his plate while he asked for the bill and explained how he needed to get back to work. After printing out his receipt, he returned to his table and handed over the bill. It came to a total of $8.75. Not bad for a delicious salad, the cop thought. The cop was paying by card, so he punched in the payment cost and swiped his card for the transaction to go through. With a smile, Courtney thanked the man and told him to have a good day. He nodded, gave a little smile back, and started getting himself ready to leave. Courtney didn't think anything of the interaction at this point. There were often cops dining in the restaurant during their lunch break, so she continued going on about her shift. However, once the cop left, Courtney returned to the table to pick up the bill and finish up clearing his table ready for the next customer. This was when she noticed something out of the ordinary. She picked up the paper receipt and noticed there was a little note written on it. She had to look twice at it first, but then after a third glance, she saw that it was a message for her. But what did it say? Well, the note said, "Enjoy your first, you will never forget it." But how did he know this? He could clearly see she was carrying a child, but how did he know it was her first child? They'd hardly said 2 words to each other. Then Courtney realized that he must have been listening to the conversation she was having with the table next to him. Her heart was touched. She appreciated his kind words ever so much. But then she noticed something else. Despite the sale at only costing $8.75, he had also decided to leave her a tip. And it was a staggering amount too, $100. She'd never received such a big tip from one customer before, so to see this made her overwhelmed with emotion. He was so reserved and quiet while she served him, so he was the last person she would think would leave such a huge tip. She was going to make sure this $100 went a long way, as it meant so much to her. Courtney immediately burst into tears. She couldn't control the tears running down her face. She was so overwhelmed by the thought that someone could be so generous. She ran over to her boss in floods of tears to tell him what happened. And at first he thought something terrible was going on. But then she explained the truth, and he put his arms around her, telling her that he's not surprised considering how good of a waitress she is. After her tears stopped streaming and she calmed down a little, there was only one thing on her mind. She needed to find the cop and thank him personally. Such a wonderfully kind gesture needed to be thanked in person. After realizing he might still be close, she ran out to the parking lot, but there was no cop car in sight. He'd gone. But her hope for finding him didn't stop there. As soon as her shift ended, she went to the local Voorhees Township police station to see if she could find him. Courtney was desperate to find him. After telling her dad, he wanted to help find him too. He was so grateful that someone would be so kind to his daughter. After hearing her story, her dad posted on social media to see if they could get in contact with him online. In his post, her dad wrote, "It's not about the amount of money it is, it's about the humanity he showed. He must have seen how she's struggling, especially standing up all day pregnant. So it's his way of saying, I understand your struggle." Perhaps the biggest lesson learned for Courtney and her dad was that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially police officers. We live in times at the moment where we're continuously fed bad stories about cops. But this shows that it's utter nonsense to hold your belief that all police are the same. In his post, her dad continued saying, "You always hear that police are on a power trip, but most of them are just doing their job." The post about his daughter's story made a huge impact on social media, with thousands of people taking an interest in Courtney's interaction with the kind-hearted cop. The post ended up getting almost 10,000 reactions, 1,000 comments, and 3,500 shares. All the comments were expressing the appreciation of the police officer's gesture. One user wrote, "That's such a lovely thing to do. This story has warmed my heart. It's so important that we all respect police officers." It's fair to say the post was a viral sensation. And since it became so popular online, Courtney's popularity as the bubbly waitress skyrocketed too. The diner received hundreds of phone calls from people also wanting to show their appreciation and donate funds to her future as a new mom. Courtney was utterly blown away. She never knew people could be so generous, even strangers who she once served. But despite having plenty of calls, did she ever receive a call from the cop? Due to the story going viral, there was no way he didn't hear about it somehow. Wanting to make sure he knew how grateful she was, Courtney and her dad decided they'd go to the police department and give them a box of donuts. It was the least they could do, especially seeing as how the officer wanted to remain anonymous. Voorhees Police Department made a post on their Twitter saying, "We want to thank Brian and Courtney for coming to us." They also promised to let the anonymous cop know. Shortly after Courtney and her father visited the police department, Courtney went into labor. After a safe and successful birth, the new mom now has a beautiful little girl she named Kaylee. She arrived healthily and happily into the world. And Courtney couldn't be more thrilled with her bundle of joy that she loves more than she ever could have imagined. One thing is for sure is that she'll have an incredible story to tell Kaylee about her pregnancy when she grows up.